Welcome to Wannabe Clutter Free, formerly Wannabe Minimalist, the podcast for busy families who are tired of the chaos, fed up with being overwhelmed, and ready to enjoy life again. Each week, we talk about how to let go of the clutter so that you can focus on the things that actually matter. And it's not just physical clutter. We talk about the mental and emotional stuff too, because if it's holding you back, it's time to ditch it. I share what I've done in my own life to declutter, organize, and calm the chaos, but you won't just hear it from me. There are amazing guests too. It's practical, doable, and simple for those of us that want to be clutter-free. Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back to the show. My name is Deanna Yates, and you are listening to the Wannabe Clutter Free podcast, episode number 215. On today's episode, I am chatting with the minimalist mom herself, Diane Boden. We talk about sentimental clutter and how to get over some sentimentality, what to do if things are sentimental to you. And it's just a really, really fun conversation about just diving in to minimalism and what that means. It's just a really fun perspective. So I think you're in for a treat today and you're really going to enjoy this episode. But before I get there, I do want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I know you have a choice between a lot of different podcasts, and I love that you are here with me today. So if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'd love to know what other topics you want to hear on the podcast. So come on over. You can DM me over on Instagram. I am at Wannabe Clutter Free, or you can join our private community. It's called the Wannabe Minimalist Family Community on Facebook, and join in the conversation there. We would love to have you. And if you like what you hear today, could you do me a huge favor and leave a rating or a review for this show wherever you are listening to this podcast, and invite a friend along with you on this journey. I was over on Diane's podcast a couple weeks ago once this airs, and we talk about that idea of having a friend along with you on this journey and just being vulnerable and having that moment of conversation and just really finding someone that has your back and you have their back. And if someone asked you to help them, you would absolutely be on board. So maybe that just gives you a little bit of a kick in the behind today to get somebody on board this journey with you as well. Invite them along to listen to this episode and see if it helps get your decluttering juices churning. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about who we have on the show today. I'm sure she does not need any introduction. If you have ever listened to other minimalist podcasts, I am sure you have come across her before. So Diane Boden is the voice behind the top-rated podcast, Minimalist Moms. Through her show, Diane shares her personal experiences and interviews inspiring guests who offer insights and tips on living a fulfilling life with less. Diane's expertise and message have been sought out by various other podcasts, including The Spillover with Alex Clark, 1,000 Hours Outside, The Mom Hour, and more. She has also been featured in Simplify magazine's March 2023 issue. In addition to her successful podcast, Diane is also an author of a book released in March of 2021. Her words and advice have impacted countless individuals and families looking to simplify their lives and find more meaning in the things that matter most. Diane resides in Columbus, Ohio with her loving husband and 3 children. And now, let's get to our conversation. Well, hey, Diane, welcome to Wannabe Clutter Free. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm so good. I'm excited to finally get a chance to talk with you.
Yes, me too. I'm so excited to have you here today. But if people are new to you, which if they're listening to this podcast, I am absolutely sure they have heard about you. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes. So my name is Diane Boden, and I'm host of the Minimalist Moms podcast, which I started with a friend like 6-7 years ago. I ended up taking it over on my own a couple of years into that. And now it's more interview based, where I just talk to all of the knowledgeable people, which I was telling you, under like this minimalist umbrella of intentionality, simplicity, and of course, minimalism. So that's what I do for a living, I guess, if you will. It's been a creative project turned into somewhat of I don't even want to say career, just kind of a side hustle, fun thing that I do now. But I have 3 kids, and I live just outside of Columbus, Ohio now. And I homeschool my oldest daughter. That's kind of a fun fact. And what else? I think that's just like an overall brief summary of who I am.
Love it. Okay, so just the oldest daughter you homeschooled. The younger 2, you don't.
No, I know that's very strange. Well, so it's funny as we're recording this. Tonight, I'm going to talk to my husband about possibly homeschooling our soon to be 2nd grader. I think for us, we were in the middle of a move like kind of during the fall, and it just seemed like a better fit for him to go to public school. It's near our home. And so we were just, okay, this will work. But I think the main reasons that I decided to start homeschooling my oldest are similar feelings that I'm feeling and experiencing now with my son. And so it's kind of just like, why am I not doing this? Why did I fight for her to be homeschooled? And I didn't do that as much with him. So I do think that I'm a huge advocate for homeschooling. I don't think it's for everyone. I think that every child is unique in the way that they should be schooled. The preschooler just goes to preschool. So that's why I don't homeschool him. But yeah, it's kind of this like back and forth tug of war I'm having with myself right now to say, like, am I capable to do two homeschooling educations, like feeling the responsibility and the weight of that? But also, I will say, I think for anyone that has somewhat of a desire to homeschool, you have as much time as you want to make sure that you get it right. So I've always kind of wondered, why did homeschooling moms say that their kids are like at the top of their class or like they're excelling? But it's because if my daughter doesn't get something, we have all the time to make sure like she really fully understands it before we move on. Like we won't move on until she understands it. So I guess all that to say, part of me is just like, Diane, you know how this works with Shar. You can totally do it. You're totally capable. You can outsource things that you need to outsource. And sorry, that was a long winded story to tell you why.
No, I just made a note because I want to say one thing and then I want to come back to something you said. But how long, what are your, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but, and we can take this offline if you don't want it. But what are your plans? Like, how long do you plan on homeschooling her?
So I go in these waves where I want to homeschool all three of my kids for always forever because I think that sometimes I go on waves of saying like, what is the point of public school if you look back into the history of it, which hopefully I'm stating this correctly, but I believe it was Rockefeller that started the public school system, and he did it kind of during the Industrial Revolution to get people just kind of, he set them up to be workers and employees and kind of all the same. And so for me, I'm like, I don't want to be the same. I want to be different. I want my kids, I don't know. I just will go back and forth with some of these things. So when I think of it that way, I'm like, we're going to do this forever. But then realistically, I have to be honest with myself, which we'll get into about minimalism and decluttering, which I try to do as often as I can. But I just want what's best for them. And sometimes being around more friends, or sometimes it is more structure of like you know what time of day you're having these certain classes. So I feel like I can see both sides, but like my emotions sometimes get the better of me of wanting to protect and wanting to just live differently. So I don't know, to be continued. I figured we'd just make the decision as the years come.
Yeah. I was just curious. I am not a homeschooling mom. I have zero desire to homeschool my daughter. So to each their own. I actually am, I feel no offense by you saying you want to be a homeschooler mom. Like, I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Like, people get to do whatever they feel is right for them. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the day and age when we live. But yeah, she and I would not get along too well if we were trying to homeschool for the, during the day. So yeah.
Well, I should have said this. I should have said this. I'm married to a public school teacher.
Oh my goodness. Interesting.
So that's why I said I had to fight for for me to be able to homeschool in the first place because, like, I obviously see the benefits. My degree is in education for high school, so I definitely see where it fits. It's just sometimes I will go to the extremes of my mind, and that's why sometimes I'm like, "No, we're doing this forever." So we'll see, 1 year at a time.
1 year at a time. I like it. Well, and the other thing you said too that I think pertains to everything in life is you have the time you need. You make the time for the things that are important to you and where you want to focus. So, whether that is homeschooling your kids, starting a business, decluttering your house, all the different things, like there are so many things vying for our time and attention, but we can channel our energy where we want to put that. So I think that is a great way to kick off this conversation and talk about how did you get into minimalism?
Okay, so I had a light bulb moment back probably 10 years ago at this point, we'll say. My husband and I were newly married and we were searching for something in my parents' basement. And he looked at me and said, "Look at all of these things that are now in boxes. They were once your dad's hard earned working hours." And I didn't say anything to him about it. Like we just continued on with our time. But it just got this ball rolling of, wow, I've been working since I was 15 and I really have nothing to show for it except for a closet full of clothes. And my husband's always been pretty disciplined with budgeting and just having a financial plan. So I kind of hopped on board with that just because we were married. But for myself, it was like, am I going after the things or do I want the experiences? And so it just kind of shifted in my head of I want to focus on vacations as families or like date nights or I don't know, like passes to places. Like I love to go to the theater. It's one of my favorite things here in Columbus. So just really it was a mindset shift of saying like the things are not going to bring me happiness. I have nothing to show for it. And I always want to say whenever I tell this story, I'm so grateful. Like I feel like my sister and I had an idyllic childhood with the things, but I also think there's something to be said about continuing to store things too that made me kind of venture down the decluttering path there. So it was time is money. That was one light bulb moment I had. And then also like, I don't want to store these things once we start having kids long term. Like once my kids are out of the house, like I want our house to be our own. So it was like a lot of different thoughts that I had that I started processing at that point that put me on this path.
Love that. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, Diane's going to talk to us about how we decide what items to keep and what to let go of.
I'm Margaret.
And I'm Amy.
And together we host the podcast, What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood.
Margaret, I would say you're sort of a where are my keys kind of mom.
Correct. Sometimes a where are my kids kind of mom. Well, you're, Amy, more of a we were supposed to leave 35 seconds ago, mom.
I mean, touche. In each episode of What Fresh Hell, we come at a topic from our usually completely opposite perspectives. I bring the research.
And I bring kind of the gimlet eye. Like, is that research really going to work, people?
And almost 10 million downloads later, we're still laughing.
We also talk to experts in the parenting field, plus parents with stories we can all learn from.
We make each other laugh, we challenge each other's assumptions, and we have what we think is the best parenting community on the internet.
Check out What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood wherever you listen to podcasts.
So, okay, what were some of the things, if you don't mind me asking, that were stored and you were like, why? Or what was it that was so just shifting about the things that were stored?
Oh, sorry, Dad. He has this entire bin of stuffies from childhood, which I mean, honestly, like that's one thing I struggle with. I am very sentimental about my stuffies because they obviously have feelings and emotions, and they are going to be very sad if they are if we throw them away. However, to me, I'm like, why are you keeping this? Like, we have our favorites, and I have taken that with me. It's my little Cabbage Patch is in my sentimental box that I have at home. So that was one thing. And then he still had preschool artwork, but just like all of these projects, all of this Play-Doh that is like completely disintegrated. There's a book called The K, C-A-Y, that I did this. Actually, it was pretty impressive. This project that I did in middle school that he kept this box because that's what I stored it in. So that was down there. So a lot of like sentimental things for him because he is a sentimental person, which is what we're going to talk about a lot, I think, today. But yeah, just things that kind of had overstayed their welcome. It's like, why you don't even put that Christmas decoration out anymore, but you still have it. Like, just get rid of it. It's just down here collecting dust. And I think in certain ways it's more painful because every time he goes down there, he probably sees it. And it's a reminder of a fleeting time, a past moment. Whereas I would rather just live in my memory. But I think that there's so much emotion when we continue to see those things. So again, this all was an evolution of thought that I continued to have, but that was that initial like peeling back the onion.
Yeah, it was so interesting. Okay, so first off, I love that you were able to have that moment with his stuff to then have that reflective moment for yourself of like, oh, okay, I also have a bin of stuffies. Do I want to, in 30 years, have my kids looking through it to say like, what was mom thinking? Or, oh, okay. And also, I think Toy Story is probably one of the worst things that ever happened when it comes to being a minimalist. So we actually waited to watch that story or to watch that with our daughter because I didn't want her to have that big connection to things. So we actually waited to watch that for a while to where she could be like, oh, okay, it's just my toys. And she didn't have that huge emotional connection. So, but it gets us into sentimental. So let's dive in. So listening to you, I think you would consider yourself a sentimental person, yes?
I am. If I'm being honest, I absolutely am. But I think one of my tips is rationality and being honest with yourself. I mean, that's really all that you need. And when I'm honest, I'm way more capable of moving through the sentimental items than if I'm just basing it all on emotion.
I love that because I am actually not, I would not consider myself a sentimental person, much to the chagrin of my family. They probably are just like, oh my God. Because I don't attach the emotions to the things. And I think that sometimes people think of me as a cold person, which is interesting. Because if you meet me in person, I'm actually a very warm, inviting, like friendly person. But when it comes to stuff, I think my family thinks of me as a little cold. So it's interesting. I know my dad doesn't really like me to help him declutter, which I get. And my sister, like neither of them really wanted to have me help them move, which I get because I think they feel like I'm judging them for their stuff. And I'm absolutely not, right? Their stuff is their stuff and they get to keep what they want to keep. I'm a big proponent of you are in charge of your things and no one should, put their emotions and their judgments on your things. But being able to be that reflective mirror if they're at a point like you did with your dad's stuff to say like, okay, I'm ready to take a step back. So I am excited that we're talking because I don't come from that place of sentimentality. So I'm excited to get your perspective on these things. So how do you think people should, you already talked about kind of rational, like looking at it with a rational mind versus this emotional mind. But where do we start? If someone is really sentimental, where should they start to kind of get a handle on their stuff?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you recognize sentimentality as that emotion. And sorry if you've said this on your show, I'm sure you have, but the object is a representation of your memory. It's not the memory. So, like I said, for some of those Christmas decorations, to me, being a sentimental person, I feel sad or nostalgic for the past or missing a time in the past when I see that Santa. We'll just say that is an example. So I don't want to feel that regularly. So I would rather just deal with the item then, remember I have this memory with me for always, think back on it lovingly, and just not have that in my home. So I think that for me, I am kind of more like you in the sense that I'm like, let's rip off this Band-Aid now. Like I would rather not store all of that emotion. I'd rather move through it. And that's where I think the rationality piece comes in with like, I can't store it all. And then this is kind of, if we want to kind of jump into it, I do like to think about death quite a bit and my mortality, which I think a lot of people don't want to confront. I heard something, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I was listening to something the other day, and I think it's like a Buddhist illustration, but basically it's the idea that we're all walking towards a cliff. But how are you going to, we're all going to go off that cliff. We're all going to go over. That's death. But how are you going to get there? Are you going to take the scenic route, or are you going to say the things to the loved ones that you want them to know? Or are you literally going to be pulled backwards by this gravitational pull that is going to eventually pull you off? Like you're going to go kicking and screaming. So, okay, I'm taking that story and applying it to the things and the way that I live my life. If I'm thinking about one day I'm going over that cliff, I'm not taking my things with me. They're staying back behind. So that way, but what I am taking with me, I guess we're getting into like afterlife or whatnot. But to me, I'm like, the experiences will always be with me in my soul as years pass by. But like the things can weather away. And so again, I've said a lot. I'm going to let you take a turn. But I think a lot of that is involved in my ability to move through it.
Makes sense. Well, and as you were saying, like, I can't take it with me. The immediate thing that popped into my mind was like, yeah, we're not all pharaohs with, pyramids, and our stuff is not being buried with us, right? Like, it is not treasure, really, if we think about it. A lot of it is plastic or stuff that's not reusable, stuff that will disintegrate and break away. And it's interesting. The idea of looking at things, and yes, I feel like if something has a negative emotion, absolutely do not keep it in your home because that will just fester and you don't need that, right? You've already had it once. I'm sure it's taking up rent in your mind, right? I'm sure it's in there somewhere. So you don't need that thing to remind you of that. But yeah, having things that remind you of good times, I get why people keep those things for sure. Your perspective on it was really interesting to hear about how you just want to have that moment of, thinking about it lovingly and having that moment. Do you keep anything? Do you have any way to preserve some of these really special things, or do you let them go?
So I'm glad you asked that. I do have these boxes from the Container Store. They're fairly big, but I have one for all my kids, myself, and my husband. And that's our sentimental box. It's things that make maybe no sense to anyone else, but that's my box of things. And I've been pretty good about regularly going through those things with my oldest. Now I'll do that with her, but just seeing like, okay, I think I'm ready to let this go. Cause I also think there's something to be said about like exposing ourselves to things, like exposure therapy, in the sense of like, okay, I've seen this thing. It has a tug on me. Okay, I'll put it away for a while. I see it again. I felt that way about my daughter's clothes. Just seeing them again, it was too hard to declutter them at first. And now I have like less of an attachment to it because now I'm looking forward to the future with her, not so much living in the past. And so I have a few of my favorite things that she wore, but also like, sorry, this is just like a side note. Passing along clothes to my niece has been really cool to see Charlotte's clothes on her. And it's like the second life. And it's like, it doesn't end up in a landfill right now. And I get to like see that like second life through her wearing it. So I think that has been helpful to me, also getting rid of things that I have that emotional attachment to, like knowing they're going to a good home and or have a home and it's not just the garbage.
Yeah, we do the sentimental bin as well. So we each have one. The no questions asked, absolutely. Like you get to keep whatever you want in your bin. Again, that judgment-free zone of just, it's your bin. However, when it gets full and you can't close the lid, you got to deal with it. You got to do something with the stuff in there. And that idea of exposure therapy, I know I've heard that. I don't know if I've heard it in exactly that term, but yeah, that makes sense, right? The more you go back to something, you're going to have a moment with it, feel whatever that emotion is, and then maybe it does get easier as things go on. In our home, I try to keep like the one, like if things are really sentimental and I have a collection of things, I try to keep just one, right? Just the one thing that represents all those memories. So it doesn't take up as much space. Like for instance, our daughter, the outfit we brought her home from the hospital in is I put it up, framed it. I have it with a little handprint and footprint, and it's up on our wall, and it has just a lot of different, connotations and different meanings and like where we got it and all the things. So it's just nice to be able to do that. But yeah, how do you display things in your home, or is it really minimalist as well? I'm curious.
Well, I think I told you, I don't know if it was when we were recording my podcast or this one earlier on, but we moved about 5 months ago. So I have not hung up anything on our walls yet because I'm kind of fickle too. I really want to love what I have. So I finally bought my first piece of artwork that's going to go up there. And it took me that long to figure out what I wanted. But all that to say, not really. I just feel like, oh, I just get rid of it. We have no family pictures in our home. That's like a hot take. Yeah. Well, I think this is,
Really? That is a hot take.
yeah, this is for me personally. I think I don't like seeing the same thing over and over again because again, I'm like, oh, why do I have this picture? I don't love it anymore. I think that's why I like abstract art because I feel like every time you see it, you can see something different in it. But if I see the same image over and over again, I'm bored of it. That again, that's just a side note. That has nothing to do with minimalism, but I'm just, no, we have no pictures of our family hung up. I've never liked that.
Which is interesting as a photographer.
I know that is interesting.
That's interesting. Ooh, yeah, we'll have a little offline discussion about this. I'm so curious. Oh my goodness.
I should probably like go talk to my therapist about that. What does that mean?
One more quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into if her family's on board with decluttering, how she preserves her memories when it comes to her different things. Does she take photos? Does she not? There is so much more coming at you. So come on back. Interesting. We don't have, on the flip side, I don't have any art in my house that isn't made by someone that I know, right? Like we have a couple paintings that were painted by family, but all of ours are like this picture behind me. They're of our experiences. So I have a ton of family pictures, but none of them are like the posed on the beach picture. They're all like a picture of my daughter on my husband's shoulders on a hike in Switzerland, or this is from Rio de Janeiro, or like, because we love to travel. And so that has just been that really, I try to tell our story through the things we have in our home. And that for me is what minimalism is. It's like telling our story. So interesting. I find that so interesting, but it doesn't surprise me that it took you that long to find art. I have never picked out a piece of art that I've loved enough to put up. So for sure.
No, I like that you do that. I do have my friend, she is helping me kind of curate what the home looks like because I like vintage, eclectic, mid-century modern, a maximalist art gallery type wall, even though I know that kind of is like anti what I preach.
So I have one. Don't worry.
In good company. But she is a photographer as well. And she's like, I really think that you're going to like these photos that I chose. She like told me to send her a bunch of photos. So she's like, I've chosen my favorites and I'm going to put these up. So to be continued with if I end up liking this when she does this, but she did pick some photos to put with my gallery of art, which I think it's really cute when you have your kids' art displayed. If you, I don't know, like I'm not opposed to this. Yeah, I'm not opposed to any.
I have one of those too. You and I are very similar. This is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think again it comes back to like being intentional about the things you have, but I think with sentimental items, using it up absolutely. Like if you have your grandmother's china or jewelry or your mom's earrings, like wear those things, like don't preserve them in your home like a museum. We don't have museums that we're living in. We have homes where we're using the things that we love, and if we don't love them, why do we have them?
Yes, I love that sentiment. Why if we're not using them or we don't love them and they're displayed for us to look at and admire, why are we keeping them? I am so on board with that. How has this worked in your family? Is your family on board? Are they similar in this, kind of living way to live?
Do you mean like my husband and kids or like extended?
Yeah. No, husband and kids. I mean, we can't contain the extended. I think you gave us a glimpse when you were talked about decluttering your dad's basement.
Yeah. No, I will say though, I'm glad that you said that like my insight into his clutter gave me perspective. So my dad finally, he's 74. Last year, my aunt passed away. It was my mom's sister. And because my mom still works, he was the one to go through my aunt's things. And he was so overwhelmed by the amount of things that she had that he was like, we're not going to do this to you. My dad has since gone through their entire house. They're downsizing. They just sold. And it was that moment where he got perspective through someone else that he was like, oh my gosh, no. So despite me talking to him for like 10 years with this, with my journey, I think it does have to be in your own time that you come to it, which will segue into my answer. I would say some of my kids are more on board than others. My youngest he's almost 5, but like, who knows? My oldest is somewhat of a hoarder, but she's also okay with when I go through, like, she feels the overwhelm of the thing. So when her room used to be messy, when I pointed out, like, hey, you can actually exist here a lot easier when you clean and you have fewer things. She saw that after we cleaned, and I would say she's kept her room clean ever since. She does have her things that she likes. She has more than I would want her to. I think the great thing about kids is that you can like you're not their puppet master. You can walk alongside them, but you can do the visual boundaries of like, here's your shelf you can fill up. And then once it's filled, kind of like you said about the box, then we have to address it. So I like that with kids, helping them maintain the clutter. But yeah, I would say like this is the only thing they've known. So it's kind of hard to be like, no, they're not teenagers where they have their own really strong opinions yet. And then my husband, I don't know. It's curious. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are. Do you think that men are better at being minimalist? Because I feel like my husband's always just kind of lived that way.
I think that there are less options for men to buy. So yes, I think society, even now as we're recording this, it's early June, it'll come out in July, but I'm thinking of like Father's Day gifts, right? If you look at the different gift lists for men versus women, like it's insane. There's so many options when it comes and you look for what should I get mom for Mother's Day? The list is a mile long. And if you look for the men, it's like a tool set, socks, a top, some beef jerky. Like these are the things that they push for men. So I think that part of it is societally, like we just don't give them as much stuff. And I think there is that big push of quality over quantity. And I think as a society, we push men's value is in what they contribute and the security they provide to their families. I'm not saying that's what we should do. I'm just saying societally, I think that's what we do. And for women, it is their looks and their beauty and how they nurture. And they push a lot of things. Like if you have these things, you'll be beautiful. If you use this makeup, you'll be beautiful. So I think that creates a big discrepancy when it comes to the stuff between the sexes. So that's my little soapbox moment.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I would say with my husband, he has some things that I don't love that he has, but I've always said and giving people advice with this, if they have a space that's their own, they can do whatever they want there in the space. And the communal spaces, it's more of a compromise and or agreement. Or for me, I'm a stay-at-home mom. So I'm like, hey man, I'm usually existing here. So I kind of want to set it up to the way that it's most convenient for me. And again, it doesn't mean that I have I'm not trying to make it where he doesn't like to exist in the space. He typically likes everything that I choose to do design-wise and whatnot, but he does have his space where he can hang up his big fish that his grandpa had caught. Like, I don't want that in my house, but in his space, he has it hung up, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, I just had a moment too of thinking like when men hang out, what do? Right? They go play golf, they watch the sports game, they go do things. What do women do? Oh, we're going to go shopping. Let's meet up and go shopping, right? And better for worse, but isn't that interesting that those are the things that come to mind if I think of when people get together? Interesting. All right. I don't have a solution for it today. It was just an observation.
Yeah, no, that's something that I should do a deep dive on. I feel like, yeah, I should just gather my thoughts on all of that.
Me too. Interesting. All right. Well, we'll get there. All right. So then, as a minimalist or someone who lives intentionally, do you have a lot of things that or do you have anything that you're holding on to pass down to your kids? How do you feel about that?
Holding on of mine to pass down to my kids. I mean, I would say, obviously, their boxes, especially my little boys, I've made those boxes myself. It's the special things. I mean, I have no problem throwing away the majority of artwork that comes home. It's like, I look at it, and it's kind of like with gifts, that moment of connection between 2 people. So when my son shows me something he's proud of, we have that moment together. Again, that's fleeting and it's gone once it's mine. And once it's maybe you can hang the very special things on the fridge for a while to be displayed. But it's kind of like we're looking for that initial moment and then everything is a little bit less afterwards. So to me, I'm like, yeah, you draw little people every single day. We're going to keep the very first one and then we're going to get rid of all of these. So yeah, I have their boxes that I'll pass down to them that I've curated a little bit, but with stuff of my own, I don't know. I don't know if I have anything that I'm like, "Oh, they need to keep this one day." I would just say there's stuff that yeah, that I've cultivated in those boxes.
Do you have like family heirlooms or anything? I'm just curious. Or things that you think will come down to you from your parents, like on the flip side where you're the kid inheriting things.
I don't know, I guess with sentimental stuff, I'm, really drawn to this is another hot take. I don't really decorate for the holidays. In years past, some years I haven't even gotten a tree when, my daughter was really little. I know it's horrible for all the people that love Christmas, but my decoration is usually with music. So, I decorate in the sense of, it feels festive in here because I have Christmas music playing 24/7 or, a spooky Halloween playlist or, an autumnal how do you say that? Something for the
Autumnal?
fall, yeah, that word. But, something for the fall, I'll have an autumn playlist playing, and then, I'll bake for the season. So, you're kind of getting that seasonal vibe without having to clutter the space. So, I will say there's a few things that my parents have that I would be like, "Oh, I'd put that up in my house because that's a cool vintage item, and I'm into that." So, I would assume that I wanna keep those heirlooms in the family, but other than that, I'm just I don't wanna clutter my house at the holiday season. It already is gonna be so cluttered on that, with the gift giving, with things that I can't control coming in sometimes, and so to me, I'm like, it feels better to me to have things looking as they are with, those maybe, some incense or candles, that are scented and all the other stuff that I mentioned.
Nice. All right. Well, as a photographer, this might be another hot take. Do you take photos of things before you declutter them?
Yes, especially with the artwork. I have albums on my phone called I have Charlotte the artist, Martin the artist, Benji the artist. And I've kind of fallen off the wagon of doing this, but I used to be diligent about creating photo scrapbooks on Shutterfly. And in those scrapbooks for the year, I would have Charlotte's art all in there. So I have hopes. I honestly just need to get back to doing it now. But one day that's maybe something that I pass down those photography books. But also in that with going back to mortality, I'm like, oh my gosh, at some point, someone is going to throw all of these books away that I have spent so much time on. Someone is going to throw my phone away and not see all of these photos, these however many thousands of photos on my phone. And it just helps me detach a little bit more from it to say, like, what is my favorite photo? What is one to like point out and I show people, or like it's my background on my phone, or like it rotates. I don't know. I just think like, now I lost my train of thought of what the original question was, but what was the original question?
It was, do you take photos of things that you're decluttering? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so no, I'll definitely do that, but I guess it's probably more so with art and not the actual things. Like, I don't know. Things are just we just have such an emotional attachment to things. It just seems like I'm not a pessimist, I just think I'm a realist of like, what are we actually gonna go back and look at? Like, I'm sorry, I cannot stand when people videotape concerts and they're just standing there the whole time. It's like, you're not gonna go back and watch that, probably unless it's Taylor Swift, and then I understand.
Yeah. But there are going to be better recordings than your recording.
That's how I feel, or like
Is that because are we just older? And like we went to concerts without a phone?
that's true too.
Is that part of it? Like, but I agree. I'm on board with that. My husband absolutely hates it. In fact, I think we probably go to less concerts now because of that fact. Yeah, I feel the same way about fireworks.
Yeah, it's like, go look it up on your local, like, Facebook group page, because some professional photographer there with a really wide angle lens is capturing that. Like, I'm not gonna capture it as well.
So just enjoy it. Have a minute. Just enjoy it. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, just enjoy it. Mhm. Oh my gosh, are we like old, like, witches? Like, we're just being I just feel like we're being mean.
No, we're being realist. Well, and I think it gives people permission to enjoy it, right? You don't have to document everything. You don't have to put everything on social media. You don't have to put your life on display if you don't want to. If that's your jam, that's your jam. It's not my jam. So you're probably not finding this podcast because you saw my life on Instagram. It's probably the opposite way.
Yeah, I will say no, I'll say with that in regards to photos, I feel like I used to be when probably I had 2 kids, posting in real time, like, it was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to get the right photo of this moment to capture it because it's so precious and they just look so cute." And now I'm so much better about, like, I never post in real time, it's usually days later, or I'll just do, like, a May dump of all the May photos of, like, us outside and then the activities that we did. So it kind of just allows me to, like, at some point get to them because I love the art of a photo, and I love capturing my kids, like you said, like, doing things as opposed to necessarily posing them. So yes, I will capture in that way, and I like it to look curated. Like, if you go to my personal Instagram account, like, I like the aesthetic that I have because to me, it's a creative outlet where I'm not doing it in the moment. I can get to it later and then have that on display that I go back and look through, and I do that regularly. Like, I love looking through the photos there that I have chosen. So, I guess in that sense, it's not the thing that I'm taking an image of, but it's like I really wanna capture those experiences in a creative way, and that's for me personally later.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Yeah. All right. Well, we're giving you permission. You can just enjoy the moment. If you're listening to this, that's what we're hoping to get out there and then curate the things that you want, but from a creative perspective, from a fulfilling you, not from a comparative, you know, what is the word I'm looking for? Not from like a way that you're, I don't know. What are we trying to say there?
Like, hold on, comparative, like, not one-upping. Yeah, I don't know what word you're looking for, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah, doing it for a way to fulfill yourself, right? And be fulfilling to you and for your own enjoyment, not because you're trying to, impress other people. Impress, I think that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, or, like, keep up with the Joneses or do it because you feel like you have to. Again, I think I felt like I always had to, like, share in real time, like, "This is what I'm doing, this is who I'm with," because everyone else is doing it. But it's just like, no, I can just enjoy this moment and not have to share it. Again, if I'm going to, maybe not right then and there, but also I can allow that moment to just exist and have been a moment and a memory.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we start to wrap this up, this has been lovely. I have one more question for you before we get to our wrap up. And it's sentimental clutter is so mentally draining. Do you have any tips for how people can stay motivated when they're just like, oh God, that was a lot. That was a big day?
Yeah, I mean, For me, I am a more like, let's rip the Band-Aid off, let's go. Sometimes you might have to have someone literally come over to your home and take it to the Goodwill or to the garbage. Like, you might need a hand held, and that's totally fine too. But I do think if we're realistic with ourselves and we say, like, we cannot keep it all, but again, what's our very favorite thing that we have inherited, or maybe our few favorite things, that just seems like a lot easier. But yes, if you're just build that momentum. We talked about it on when you were on my show about the little bite-sized pieces. Like, don't do it all necessarily in one go if you know you can't handle it, especially if this is like a recent loss. If you're going through your parents' things and it is a recent, it has been recent for you, I think sometimes that can be way too overwhelming. You need to deal with your grief first before you start like going through. But also, this is something, I guess I'll just put it out here now. I would love to like get into the business of helping people downsize, like before they maybe go into like an assisted living and or home. And one of the thoughts that I have there is whatever those items are that your parent is taking with them there, those are their treasures. Those are the things that they value the most. Like, forget about the storage locker. Like, maybe allow yourself to detach from that storage locker more, because it's like, these are the things my parent want or wanted to have. So what can I take from these? Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yes. No, totally. Well, as someone who has helped grandparents of, my in-law grandparents move to assisted living, lost my father-in-law to melanoma, like going through this process multiple times and just seeing, yeah, what do they choose to keep? What are the things that really did seem important? And yeah, having conversations where you hear people be like, oh, I don't really like that, but I'll just let my kids deal with it. Oh my God, please don't do that. Right? Like, if you can. And then, like you said, but just if your parent did do that and left all the stuff for you to deal with, what were the things that in the end they really surrounded themselves with? I love giving yourself that break because it is so it's just guilt filled. I mean, just filled with guilt for having to go through a whole entire house full of stuff and feel like I'm just throwing it all away. But if they didn't take it with them in the end either, then it wasn't as super important to them. So I absolutely think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, that seeing that second life of something as well, like if you know, and you can even put it on social media, like, I recently lost a parent, or like, hey, I'm getting rid of this, like you personally are, like letting it go seems a little bit easier because again, you know that it feels like it's wasted. Like, I think that wasteful feeling, it can be heavy as well. And so if we can just allow ourselves to breathe a little bit more and say like, it's not gone forever and there it is. And then you just keep living your life and it's out of sight, out of mind. And then you slowly fade away from those feelings. It's just, we are so driven by our emotions and feelings. And I'll just keep it at that.
Yeah, we could talk forever. I could keep this conversation going, but let's go ahead and wrap up there. I think that was a good place to stop. So where can listeners find out more about you?
Well, it's the Minimalist Moms podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. Same name on Instagram. I'm personally at Diane_Boden. And I have a book. It's Minimalist Moms Living and Parenting with Simplicity. I wrote that during COVID. So that's out there. It's kind of somewhat of a beginner's starting point, just little mantras, like bite-sized places where people can start.
Oh, that's so great. All right. And then my favorite way to wrap up every interview is with 3 rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what does clutter-free mean to you?
What does clutter-free mean to me? I think as long as I can exist in my days, I don't want to say as a well-oiled machine because it doesn't need to be that perfect, but as long as I can have some ease in moving through my days, like you said, I think was it on my podcast or yours that we were talking about touching things? Was it on mine? I think like you said on my podcast, the things that we touch on the regular, if those things aren't decluttered, then I can't move through my life with ease. So I think living a decluttered life is ease and simplicity and allowing me to be a little bit more stress-free.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay. Number 2, what's making you happy right now or in this season of life?
I feel like maybe some people don't like to live this way, but I feel like we have a lot of fun events coming up in the summer and I like to stay really busy. With my kids, I feel like sometimes when we're just around the house, that's when the bickering, arguing, and honestly, parenting is so much harder. But I mean, we are at the pool, we are at nature groups throughout the week, we have some vacations coming up. Just there's a lot going on. And I feel like that's when we thrive the most in these experiences with one another. Some people might be the opposite, but I'm very much excited and looking forward to this season.
Awesome. Well, that's what's making you happy. That's awesome. And number 3, what is a goal you have for yourself this year?
I think just getting better at rest, turning off my mind, not always being in overdrive. Again, sorry, I keep referencing the podcast you and I did together, but I was talking about how I've just really struggled to not feel productive. And so if I can just get better this year, and it's not necessarily measurable, but if I can just look back and say, like, yeah, you said no when you should have said no, like that's a good thing for me. I just need to get better at saying no, being quiet, and just taking time to be more reflective and not just always operating in this high cortisol state. Because I think for people that are go-getters, and or just like to be extroverted and always saying yes, we can feel burnout and not even know. And then it's like, oh, how do I dig myself out of this hole I got into? So again, not necessarily measurable. I think I'll just look back in the year, but that's something I'm working towards.
Great goal. I think it's great. Well, Diane, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing such awesome information.
Thanks for having me.
Wasn't that a great episode? I love getting to connect with people that are on this journey. I know I say that all the time, but it is really surprising how much you can learn from other people that have been there, just getting a glimpse into their life and what makes them tick and what they have found important and not important. And it just might be the thing to inspire you to take a small, tiny action in your life today. So with that, I would absolutely love to know what you thought of this episode. So let me know. You can find me on Instagram. I am at Wannabe Clutter Free. So you can DM me or comment on this post. You can come join our Facebook group. It's the Wannabe Minimalist Family Group on Facebook. You can send me an email, Deanna at wannabeclutterfree.com. You can comment on this episode. You can leave a rating and a review on Apple. You can comment on Spotify. You can comment on YouTube. Come and let me know. Join in this conversation and let me know what action you're going to take, if it inspired you in any way, and how it's going to change how you approach your sentimental items. And with that, I would just love to say thank you one more time to Diane for her amazing advice and just letting us see behind the curtain into her life a little bit. And thank you to you also for joining me today. I hope you liked what you heard, and I can't wait to see you back here next week. Remember, keep decluttering. Look at your sentimental things with a different lens to make sure they're actually things that you want to keep and you're not just keeping them out of guilt, and keep moving forward. I believe in you. I know you can do it, and I'm here to help you along the way. I'm Deanna Yates, and you've been listening to Wannabe Clutter Free. I'll see you next week. Cheers.